Hello all, and thank you for joining our webinar today. I'm Ray Zwiebelhofer, the President of Software. I've met probably many of you on trade shows and client visits and such. Happy New Year, and hopefully you guys are all doing well and being safe. And we're all, like you, I'm sure, looking forward to a better 2021 coming out of this pandemic. So hate to repeat myself, but in case there's new folks on here, when the pandemic hit pretty hard last summer, we decided to go into really in a pure educational mode. And I think it's the proper thing to do based upon how many clients we have and customers that rely on our product. So we started out doing third parties that integrate and have great solutions that work with Worldox, and now we're getting into more Worldox specific stuff. And these are questions you may have, and we know most of our clients out there use just a portion of our software. And in some cases, they were set up years ago, which the definition of how you set things up may not be perfect, and or it wasn't thought through, or things have changed. You know, for example, the last 10 or 15 years, email has become so huge. Whereas, 15 years ago, you had documents in your DMS. So things have changed, volume has changed. And so we're trying to do things that may be helpful for you, that you can think through and maybe adapt at your firm. Pleased today, we're doing an introduction, but pleased today to have some of our most senior resellers on the line. You probably know many of them. And it's great to have a solid team. We consider them an extension of the Worldox family. So with that, wishing you all a great year, and Hella, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Ray. As mentioned, this is another webinar in our technology webinar series, and they're usually scheduled for Fridays at 2 o'clock. And before we get started with the webinar today, a few housekeeping notes. We are going to record the webinar, and you will be getting a link to it after the session. We have everybody muted right now, but if you have any questions, go ahead and type them into the questions pane, and we'll address any of them at the end of the webinar. The session today is a roundtable discussion on a topic, as Ray mentioned. We get a lot of questions about this particular one. What are the best practices for setting up document types? And to help us provide the answers and suggestions today, we have a group of our inner circle VARs, and I'm pleased to introduce them here now. We have Frank Jones. Frank is the founder and president of Legal Software Connection. Legal software has served law firms, legal departments, financial and accounting professionals for over 30 years. They'll soon be celebrating their 30th year as a Worldox consulting company. They also sell and support software that is complementary to Worldox. Then we have Sandy Johnson. Sandy has over 35 years of software training experience with law firms and other professional settings. She has worked for Legal Software Connection for 22 years, and as the Director of Training and Support, she's responsible for coordinating and conducting Worldox and other software training for all of Legal Software's customers. Sandy also makes high-level technical support services, and this creates a unique skill set when interacting with Legal Software's customers. And we also have Rick Barnauer. Rick has worked in the technology field for over 35 years. He's a recognized authority and speaker on law office technology, including practice management, billing systems, and document management. He's president of SciTech Corporation and consults with law firms and corporate legal departments in the Midwest on technology issues. We have John Heckman. John has been working with Worldox for over 25 years. He founded Heckman Consulting in 1997. In the last 15 years, he has focused mainly on Worldox. His book, Worldox in 1 Hour for Lawyers, was published by the American Bar Association and is currently in its 3rd edition. He has been a member of World Software's Consultants Advisory Board, the Inner Circle, since its inception in 2013. Charlotte Quiros. Charlotte has over 25 years experience working with comprehensive legal practice management software, including Worldox. Charlotte has been a member of the Baker Cadence Solutions team for 14 years, supporting and training Worldox. Van Swearingen. Van brings over 25 years of major international law firm experience and more than 15 years of supporting and training Worldox users in fast-paced production environments to provide workflow optimization and technical support for customers of Baker Cadence Solutions. Then we have Peter Brannigan. Peter is driven by the desire to empower both firms and individuals with knowledge. Peter has been focused on designing, implementing, and supporting Worldox solutions for many years. Building effective Worldox solutions and training people how to use them well is what provides him with the most professional satisfaction. John Rock. John has been working with Worldox for close to 18 years. In that time, he has presented, designed, installed, and trained hundreds of Worldox clients. His strength is understanding Worldox from the end user's perspective and training users how to be familiar, comfortable, and productive with Worldox. His passion is setting up Worldox to be as simple as it can be so that firms do not have to think too much about it. Worldox just works for them. He enjoys following up training and site reviews showing firms how to maximize Worldox software and the new features as they are introduced. And our moderator today is Rebecca Satin. Rebecca is CIO of World Software Corporation and part of the ALT founding circle. She has more than 25 years experience in law firm technology and has spoken on topics such as cybersecurity, design thinking, collaboration, and deployment planning at bar associations, ILTA, Legal Tech, and other technology forums. So we thank you in advance for the attention you'll be giving this webinar today, and I'll hand it over to Rebecca for now.
Thanks, Hella. So before we get started, we have a few poll questions that will just give us a general idea of, what our audience is looking for in this webinar. So the first poll question, let's see, let me launch this. All right. So we want to know how many document types you have in your firm. And we're getting some answers. I think you'll see that during this session, there are definitely some differences of opinion amongst the panelists here. But for the most part, there is the number of document types, at least in scale and scope, I think is something that everybody agrees pretty much on. And we'll get to that shortly. I'm trying to see if we've still got answers coming in. I think we've got 80% of the people who have voted. While we're voting, I'll just say that the Worldox software can be customized in a multitude of ways. And in part, this is why we always recommend that new clients work with one of our Worldox VARs to make sure that it's set up in such a way that it will be user-friendly. And one of the things that is critical to making it user-friendly is to make sure that the doc type is that doc types are set up in such a way that you don't want people spending too much time trying to figure out which doc type to choose. So that's one of the elements that makes a project a success. And this group of Inner Circle resellers that are with us today, I think collectively you guys have over 100 years of experience implementing Worldox. All right, let's see what we have here in terms of responses. Let me close the poll and share the responses. Can everybody see the responses? All right. So,
That's really interesting.
Yes.
That is. I was expecting to see greater quantities.
Me too.
So
All
was
right,
I.
so let's go with our next poll question. And I won't leave this one up quite as long. And we've got some answers coming in pretty quickly. More than half the people have voted. All right, and I'm going to go ahead and close this poll. So there are a lot of people who are already apparently adept at using their document types to find things. So that's good. I'm hoping that you still get something out of our webinar today. And then our third question. Are you hoping to change your document type strategy? Aha. So this is interesting, these responses. It's looking like so far, I mean, we'll see when the rest of the results come in, but so far it looks like even the people who can find things in their system are still looking to make some changes. So let me close this poll and share the results.
Wow.
All right. So we definitely have a lot to impart today, and I hope that everyone enjoys this webinar. All right.
So Rebecca,
So
you should open up the mics of every attendee so we can hear what they're thinking.
Well, the numbers of attendees that we have, I think will make it a little unruly, but we'll see about that later.
Yes,
So before
See
we
me
get
after
started,
class.
yes, before we get into the solutions, we all thought that it might be good to talk about some of the problems that we've seen in the field. So I'm going to start with, let's see. So this was the first issue that I think we've all seen in the field, and John Rock, I think you specifically had some experience with this situation.
Yeah, this was one of the sites that was not mine, but came to me as a problem child because they were having trouble searching or finding their documents. And on initial discovery, we looked at the doc type table, and this is what I found. And I said, no wonder why. So we did a complete redesign, and we made their 1,500 doc types categories and narrowed down their doc type tables, and everything was much easier moving forward from that point on.
All right. So yeah, I think with 1,500 document types, I can't even imagine trying to figure out which one is appropriate, even spending the time to read all of them in the first place.
Impressive.
Yes.
That they could even think of 1,500.
So
that's what
next
happens
up,
when you give everyone the permissions to add doc types and you have a
well,
50
yes.
user site.
Yeah.
And I think, Sandy, you were the one who talked about this when we initially met.
Oh, yes. Yes. Not a good idea.
Hmm.
Allowing everyone to add doc types. No.
I had a client that insisted that everybody should add doc types, and within a week, less than a week, they called me up and they said, "We have 2 doc types, engagement letter and retainer, and those are the same thing. And how do we fix it?"
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. Let's see. So next up, I think Rick Bernauer, you were the one who mentioned seeing this in the field.
Yes, and it kind of ties in with the one we just talked about. trying to decide who should be allowed to add in document types, but also when you're trying to reimagine how you want to have Worldox configured, you need to think about how the firm was going to be able to use it, but the people involved in making that decision. And I say this with a smile and charity in my heart, but there are some people who are very good at organizing and systems, but they're good for organizing maybe a little bit too complex a system. And if you have those people coming up with all of your document types, sometimes it turns into a system that's hard for other people to use. And at one firm, they came up with a primary document type, whether it's organized by practice area, or they say, well, these are pleadings, and under that are all the different types of pleadings. It really makes sense, but it made more sense to the person designing it than the people using it. And so the analogy I use is, if you have a file room and you send one of your average staff members into that file room with a document to store, can they figure out which file cabinet and which file drawer and what something should go into fairly quickly? But if you have so many document type options that they stand there going, I'm not sure which one of these to put it in, every 30 seconds that they spend trying to decide a simple decision is lost productivity. So my advice is, don't overly subdivide and be careful as to how complex it gets.
Yeah, thanks, Rick. So the next one is actually, this one is my biggest pet peeve from my days of working at a law firm. It just always drove me crazy when people would ask for a document type for spreadsheets or for PowerPoints or for PDFs, because a PDF could be a letter, a PDF could be a pleading, a PDF could be all of those different things. And if you want to actually find documents that are the PDF file format, there are other ways without having a document type. Same with spreadsheets and PowerPoint presentations. So this one was definitely, this was just my biggest pet peeve. So I think now, I'm sure that there are a lot of other things that are problematic with document types, but I think we'll move on to some best practices now. So the first one, and I think Frank, you definitely have a lot to say on this topic. But this is something that you mentioned that you spend quite a bit of time discussing with your clients.
Well, we do. This is probably the most frequent discussion we have, both with brand new customers and long-term customers. I believe that we have to start with an understanding of what the purpose is. And there are multiple purposes for document types. They can be used for search, of course. They can be used to filter. They can be used for document retention values, which is kind of an advanced feature. I like to take people along the path of less is more, and many of us on this panel do feel that way. But whatever that less is has to be suitable to that firm's needs, of course. And I think that's really the essence of my thinking, Rebecca. I might have mentioned in our planning conversation that I see firms using doc types. Sometimes they're personal choices. So they have a very large list of choices, and each person uses from it what they prefer to use. And as long as it's rolled out with that intent up front, you could succeed with it. But I think more firms are thinking that they're going to find other people's documents by those doc types, and that's when you begin to have a problem. So you have to strategically decide, is it a personal search tool or is it a public search tool?
Indeed. Okay, and I think you already mentioned this, Frank, but my recollection, Rick, is that you had, in fact, perhaps an analogy relating to skiing on this topic?
Well, I do, although I do not ski. But the analogy that I talked about when we had done it, and I switched to using skiing because some people who are into skiing, really it's important to them what the slopes are like and what the snow is like. So they talk about, is it powder? Is it packed powder? Is it wet? How fast is it? And those differentiations are very important to them. But to other people, they just go, it's snow. There's either snow there or it's not. And the trouble you end up with is if you're trying to ask people to subdivide everything again, it turns into be more of a labor for them than the benefit that you get. So when we were talking about it before, Frank and I and everyone else had also talked about, we always try to reinforce to the people that we're trying to go for the fewest number of options that make sense. So whereas, when somebody said, how long should a person's legs be? I think it was supposedly Abraham Lincoln who said just long enough to reach the ground. But the idea is you only have as much as you really need. So once you come up with a basic list, people can add, but always try to make it so that they have to kind of go through a little bit of a thought process gauntlet to get something new, because otherwise it's, as Frank was saying, maybe just a personal choice, and then it just clutters up your system. So what we're saying is less is really important. Less is more. In fact, maybe in your thinking, it should be everything. Just go with less.
Okay.
And it's always easier to add if you need to than it is to take away.
That's for sure.
So next up.
Oh, no.
This is always my least favorite document type, coming right after spreadsheet and PDF and those sorts of things. And was that Van who said, oh no?
Yes.
Feel free
No
to elaborate on that, oh
other.
no.
Well, the thing is that long term then, if a miscellaneous or other is made an easy choice, then a lot of folks will take it as the easy choice. Where it's much better to not give that choice, but to provide what the firm or the practice group needs, and only those, no other miscellaneous.
Thank you.
I have something to add though, but sometimes,
oh, sure.
sometimes though, at least from what I've seen, it's hard to get it absolutely right out of the gate. And so at Baker Cadence, we provide a doc type called TVA, to be assigned. And that comes in handy when they're moving legacy documents, but also if they happen to go to save a document and they really should have a doc type for that document and it's not there. And so TVA is the flag. It says, this isn't the right doc type, instead of miscellaneous. When you see that TVA, you know it's not the right doc type. And I tell them, put the doc type in your description or your additional comments, and then have a chat with your project manager, because they may have thought of that and they may have thought of a different solution. So that's what we do.
That's an idea, a good idea. I'm wondering whether, you schedule, I know that your team usually schedules some follow-up training a little bit after the implementation, after people have had the chance to use the system for a while. And I'm wondering if maybe during that training you go back through some of the to be assigned ones later, just to make sure that they're not just forgetting about them and leaving them like that.
In the initial training, when we're talking about legacy documents and getting them from the old drive into Worldox, we talk about the TVA. And if you have an active case, but some of those documents go back years, I always tell them move everything, because you only want to look in one place. But some of those really old documents probably never will get changed.
And they'll stay TBA forever.
Okay.
Yeah, we do the same thing. We call it convert as a choice to move legacy, but it's the same strategy. I think that's highly appropriate, because you'd rather than move them in bulk even though it may not be perfect, to get them into the active area than to cause people to have to slow down to make individual assignments.
Right.
Yep.
Agreed.
And during that follow-up training, that is one of the things that we discuss. You know, do you have all the doc types you need? And we take them through, look at this grouping and see, is this what you need? Do we need to make changes here? So yeah, it's part of the discussion, particularly in the follow-up trainings.
Cool. Sandy, I think you were the one that pointed out that, especially when you're looking at a site that maybe you didn't implement or was implemented, 20 years ago, and of course needs change, and what we know now is a lot different than what we knew then.
That's true.
Yes. So you mentioned making doc types inactive.
Well, it really helps, I think, to clean up your list so that you don't have this, if you do have a pretty long list, and I'm pretty sure some of those aren't being used, then what you want to do is, and you can run a report, which I think Rick is going to show us, but, see which ones aren't being used and just make them inactive, because you can still search for that doc type. You just can't save new files using it. So that inactive is a great feature.
And do you ever have them run back through and maybe change the doc types on some of those that were made inactive?
Generally, no, only because
Okay.
they're not going to do it.
Yeah, good
Yeah.
point.
Yeah.
All right. So next list. I think, Rick, you already touched on this a little bit.
Well, we all as a group talked about it. We were showing our age and talking about the old red rope folders or the different places where things were, but it gets back to that idea of trying to have a physical real world analogy. And when you were dividing things up that way, did you have 78 different little slots that you could put things in? No, because it's not practical. So try to think of it in a way, in numbers that people can actually group and divide, because for years people survived with 7 or 8 different little slots that they could put things in, and they could find them fairly well, because there's other search capabilities in Worldox besides searching by the document type that'll help you be able to find things.
Yeah, I mean, I remember. I am dating myself, but the advent of email, when most lawyers would print out every email, and those emails would go into their correspondence file along with the letters and the memos. So it was just a correspondence file that had letters, memos, and the printed emails and all sorts of things like that, instead of having, like, here are the letters, here are the memos,
Right.
here are the emails. So.
Well, and to follow up on Rick's point, Rick and I think a lot alike in that about 10 years ago, Sandy and I started, we don't even call the field doc type, because we think that words matter. And the term doc type, to me anyhow, and to others, implies probably quantity. So we began to rethink that to send out a subtle message. So we often call it binder or divider or find by, because we're trying to place in people's heads as they save things, what's the purpose here? And if we get them thinking about something other than specific doc types, these are groupings. So as Rick and I tease sometimes, when you go to Staples to buy the what are those, the raised little colored binder tab sets, I don't think you get a 50 across. I think you get 7 or 11.
Yeah.
Yep.
So try to think that way when you're putting in your list of whatever we're going to call that value.
Mm-hmm. All right. And this is something that I think, again, is very near and dear to both Sandy and Frank's parts in their doc type discussions.
Sandy?
Well, you want to think about your list as, okay, is everybody going to use this list? So you want to keep it broad and inclusive and short, or is it more of a personal list where people will, oh, well, I call that a motion, I call that a pleading, I call that, et cetera, et cetera. And so they're going to use it to search on their own documents and find them. So you have to decide, do you want it to be more public for everyone, or do you want it to be more individual, and in which case everybody uses their own favorite doc types?
Yep. I'm always a proponent of the public myself, and I think
Well,
probably most of us here are.
Mm-hmm.
that would be the preference.
It's just, of course, go ahead, Van.
I think it's good to ensure that each of the practice groups have that discussion if they want the consistency across the practice group, so that they can find each other's documents and everyone's looking at the same system. So it's important to have a discussion about that in the firm.
Yep. Okay, and John Rock, I think this is something that you discuss with people when you're talking about doc types.
You know, one of the challenges of designing World Docs for each implementation is they are different and unique. And what I try and instill in them and get across in the very beginning stages is what we're doing now is making it so that 6 months, 8 months, a year down the road, you can find what you're looking for and you can do it easily. So whether you're using the description field or the comments field or doc types or categories, you want to be able to find what you're looking for quickly. And I often tell them too, this isn't just about you today, but in 2 months when a new associate, a new paralegal, a new attorney comes on board, how easy is it going to be for them to not only save, but find documents that they need to build templates with, so that they can be moving forward as quickly as possible and learn the system easily too. But it's all about 6 months down the road. How are you going to find it?
That's a great point, actually, about people joining the firm after the fact and having to make sense of the existing system. John Heckman, I think you were.
In fact, when you, I always tell people when you set up World Docs, what you create, the system you create, depends on how you want to use it 6 months from now. So what you first have to define is where you want to get to, how you want to use it, and that determines what you create. So if you want to be able to use it in certain ways, then the conclusion follows. You need fewer doc types, etc.
Yep. Thank you, John. So this was a point that I think, Frank, you brought up, and this is almost the most important point.
Oh boy, Rebecca, can you remind me of what I was rambling on at that time about?
You were talking about, mainly that whenever you're designing a system, you really have to have an understanding of the firm culture and of their technical capabilities, specifically in terms of, the numbers of like the numbers of fields in WorldDocs. I think we've all seen people set things up very, complicated, so that there are a lot of different pieces of information that have to be entered before you can actually click save to save the document. And my recollection is your point was just really understanding the tolerance of the user community, so that you're not adding additional complexity where it won't be handled well.
Well, thank you. I think I'm a big believer in planning, and I think everybody here is a big believer in planning. That's what I keep hearing in different ways. And those firms that went through this with great planning, perhaps that's how they ended up with a lesser number of doc types, because I think we were surprised at that poll. We expected to see a large group of people with a large number because they hadn't thought through it. So, I think planning is everything and less is more.
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't mean you shouldn't have a whole lot of different cabinets that are properly segmented so that people only see what they're supposed to see. So I think a lot of thinking needs to go into it, and it's not focused on any one field. It's the overall picture of the system that people are going to use for years to come.
Definitely. And last but not least, this is a direct quote from Sandy, I think.
It was?
I think
Well,
so.
well, it's whoever said it, it's definitely pertinent because I have done this myself. I just think, oh, I have to have, a topic, a subtopic, a doc type. And it's like, then when you start to use it, it's like, what was I thinking? Let's just put this, in something that makes sense. Yes, a good division, but not, yeah, when you overthink it, you just make it way too hard.
Yep.
And that gets back to planning. I don't want to beat up on planning, but I think all of us probably have planning groups. I think we do before you go live. And to me, the purpose of the planning group is to psychologically get the people in charge to take ownership of the system they've invested in and think through in advance what others are going to bring to them as to, I wish we could, and we should have more of this and whatnot. And only if they get totally involved can you really expect to roll out a system that is meaningful to them.
Mm-hmm.
And thus, I'm often fighting the overthinking in planning meetings, and I'm seen as this really stubborn, tough guy. And Sandy comes in later with the white hat, and she's, the really nice person. But sometimes you need that kind of tough, lay it out, make certain they don't go too far on the front end.
No, and the one thing that does do when I go in then for training is the people that have been in that planning committee can say, this is why we did it this way. This is why we chose 5 doc types versus 50 doc types. And they can, are able to do that versus, me, I'm going, hey, you could do whatever you want, But it does help a lot.
And since you got to be the good cop,
Yes,
you get a good reaction.
I didn't do a thing. That was all Frank.
I'm having no trouble picturing any of that. All right, and I think from here we're going to go into each one of our resellers brought with them a tip that they wanted to mention. So I think we're going to start with Frank.
Okay. This is super simple, so forgive me because I'm sure everybody already thinks this way or knows this anyhow. In this example, I've decided that I'm not searching for a document type. I'm going to search for a fact, something that is in the document. I believe in objective versus subjective. Objective is the body of the document, the words in it. That's not an opinion. That's what's there. So when I see a site that has a whole lot of document types, or ones that are not clear, there's some that seem to be overlapping, or you wouldn't be sure. We focus them towards look for what you know. Type in a string of words, a word, a phrase. Take advantage of the powerful Boolean-based logic Worldox has for searching. In this example, it's a single word. We're searching text and file for a single word, and obviously you're going to get a list. And with Worldox GX4, beautiful list of snippets showing below those. So we go forward. So I'm thinking search for what you know, and then filter it. So to me, I rarely ever search by doc types. I may search by authors or something like that, but not doc types. I search for what I know, and then I filter by what will help me declutter that list. My term, declutter. So in this example, the first search, that word might have been referenced in many different document types. And now I'm going to be able to click those filters of document types to narrow that list. And in that example, when I picked correspondence as the document type, I get one document. And then just a tip for power users, a lot of people have never noticed they can click the little, is that a circle? What would you call that? A stop sign? What do you call that, guys? Anybody?
I call it the
red
little
dot.
green circle.
And you can click it and it reverses the logic. So the last point 4 is that's saying not those doc types. So the first one was only those of a correspondence type. The second is not these types. And the not is very, very useful.
Mm-hmm.
That's actually one of my favorite features, Frank, the not.
Mm-hmm.
Especially if you have a lot of emails and you know you're not looking for an email.
Yes.
So in closing, my term is search for objective facts, not subjective.
And guys, that's a plus sign that turns to a minus sign. Just
Yes. Thank you,
I always
Sandy.
count on you, Sandy Johnson. Thank you.
You're welcome.
If I could, I just jump in for a second to build on what Frank was talking about there. When you do a search using the binoculars in Worldox, if you're spending your time and filling in doc type or whatever, you may find something, but you also may sit there and wait for it to say there is nothing in that document type for this client or whatever. If you do the search like Frank is saying and then do the filter, it only shows you what exists within the documents that were returned. So it's, you know that you're dealing with what's there and you don't waste your time looking for something that may not actually be there.
Can you modify that screen and put my credit to it with Rick's thought, Rebecca? Because that's brilliant.
So next up, we have Peter Brannigan.
Yeah, so I think there's an area that people don't realize and don't use enough, which is the description of the doc type. So often you'll see agreement, agreement, letter, letter, contract, contract. But to me, that's a lost opportunity. So if you look at the bottom, the miscellaneous one, here we're saying miscellaneous, please use sparingly. So, you know, Van said before there might be overuse of miscellaneous. So to try and mitigate that, if we tell people, look, don't use this all the time, you know, this should be about 10% of the documents, 90% should be covered by the other stuff. But why not train people in this space and teach them something? So please use sparingly. You might as well put that in there because you can change the description at any time with no impact. You can't change the code easily, that breaks things, but the description has no impact on anything. So as you see people struggling with something, if there's some logical description you put in here, it helps them. On the example above, the MSAs, NDAs, and hold harmless, I'm going to tell a story. I used to live in Africa, and near where I was, there was a language where they had a word for helicopter, plane, train was only one word, a single word, and it basically meant it moves. So if it was a bus, a bicycle, a plane, a helicopter, that was one word. But they had 200 words for goats. They had goats with brown with white spots, goats with white heads with a red thing down the front of them, goats with brown ears and black nose. So they had 200 of those. So some law firms need a separation of NDA, MSA, contract. They need all of those things separated out because of the type of business they're doing. There's other people that they're only appearing occasionally. So group those together. Instead of having 6 doc types, put them all in one doc type and call it agreement, and you're done. Because when you get into a particular matter, you know you may only be having either an MSA or a contract or whatever. You're not going to have all of them in the one place. So think of whether you want the goat thing or you want it moves, and then help that influence how many and how you group your things. But definitely use the description area as a great way of teaching. And new employees come on board, they don't have to ask you a lot of questions. They just read the description and it makes sense. And also when they search, typing in the name, no matter what they put in here, NDA, MSA, or whatever they're believing it might be, it's going to come back and show them that's an agreement. So that's the tip.
I think I'm going to have to remember your goat versus it goes analogy, because that's just great, and it's a great way to explain it.
Adding to that description, when I do the training, I tell them to be careful about their abbreviations. If it's an abbreviation that everybody uses and understands, then use it. But if it's an abbreviation you made up on the spot, spell it out. Otherwise, it makes using that description field more difficult.
Yep.
I like
And you could
Peter's
get 70
goats way better than my snow, so I'm going to go with the goats from now on.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, so next up we have John Rock.
So one of the things that I've noticed in years and working with Worldox and some of the firms with several areas, distinct areas of practice areas, is that the different practice areas use different types of documents. So you either have two choices. You have a large doc type list that includes everything for all areas of practice, or you can have, in the old days, we used to have a field under client and matter called area practice. And then if you choose area practice, litigation, business, commercial, workman's comp, you would get documents linked to that practice area. But that was the only way to get it to work properly in the old versions. When GX4 comes along, now we can do character matching in both the code as well as the description field. When you have, I find that we don't have to break it down into two fields anymore, because if I'm working in the civil litigation area practice, if I want to save a doc type, if I type in CIV, like the example on the left, I'm going to immediately get a list of all civil litigation doc types. In the middle example, if I'm in the workman's comp area practice, I do work, WOR, and all the workman's comp doc types show up. And the example on the right is commercial. So I type in COM and all the commercial doc types are there. And so it's a way that you can very easily use the software to generate results for you and save you time. And this doesn't come into play in smaller installations where you don't have a lot of crossover in the doc types, but in the larger installations, this is extremely handy for them. And it's the fastest way I can have them categorize a doc type that makes sense to them. And these are all well thought out in the planning committee well before we go live.
So John, when you're discussing this with each practice area, do you give them a limit to how many document types each practice area can have?
We trim it down a lot. Oftentimes, we trim it down a lot because it may start with an Excel spreadsheet for the practice areas, and then they come back with round one, and then we might trim it down from there. But the goal is always between 12 and 15 that makes sense. And again, my analogy to them is it has to be logical and has to flow, and it has to be a sliding board downhill. So when I click Word and I create a new document, I'm at the top of the sliding board. I want to get right through that profile card, click OK, save the document, and move on. Is there a proper, easy landing spot to find all those fields and get through that profile card quickly? And the answer is yes, because that's our goal, is to make that happen for them so they don't hit a speed bump and get stuck.
All right, thank you. Okay, John Heckman, I think you're up next.
Okay. As a matter of practice, most people don't use more than 15 or 20 doc types because it's their particular practice. That's what they do. One of the options in the doc type table is the one that says doc type favorites. That sets what you as an individual user use the last 20 doc types you've used. If you set that as a default so that only your favorites come up, 90% of the time or 95% of the time, when you click on doc type, the favorites come up and you see what you've actually been using. So it bypasses all the other selection and gives you what you've been using, again, 90 or 95% of the time. And you can set that as the default so that it pops up every time you click on it.
That's actually a great idea to use, I would think, almost in combination with John Rock's suggestion, because that way you could perhaps have just the doc types for your practice area in your favorites tab.
Mm-hmm.
But you'd also have ones that are firm-wide, like you're not going to have 15 different email doc types for 15 different practice areas. You're going to have one. And there's a whole bunch of others that are going to be across the board firm-wide. So the favorites would be a combination of those two things.
So next we actually have Rick, who I think this was more a tool to help existing situations, but I'll let you elaborate.
Well, we all need help. And so you've sat through this whole webinar and you go, well, those are some good ideas, but I have no idea other than I think my system is messed up. No matter what you voted for at the beginning of the session, you're probably here because you're thinking it could be better. But how do you figure out what you have? And that's to run a summary report. It's a feature inside of Worldox. It's really easy to get to, but a lot of people don't know it's there. So when you start a binocular search, it brings up that screen where you can fill out all the different fields. And at the bottom of it, or sometimes it's not at the bottom, but usually it is, there's that little button that says search what? And a lot of people don't ever click on that. But if you click on it, it gives you different options that you can search for, like archive or other things. But there's an option at the bottom of that list that is shown there with the arrow where it says run a summary report. And when you click on that, and then if you were to say click OK, you could just do a search. You could limit it to a certain area of it or author, but you could just do a wide open search. Might take it a while, but it's going to process through everything and bring up a report out there. Now, by default, a lot of times it starts off with showing you the cabinet where the documents are stored and the date when it was created. You need to be able to modify that, get rid of the date field, and just click into that kind of blank gray area where the headers are and select to add the document type. And then it will summarize everything, showing you by document type how many documents there are. You can use that in a couple different ways. You could just review it on the screen. In fact, you can click on an individual entry, and then on the toolbar at the top, there's a option for detail. And if you click on that, it opens up another work list tab and shows you all the documents of that type that are out there. So you could review and you go, well, here's one that only has 7 documents of that type. Do we really need it? And you could review it. The other big thing I just wanted to mention is if you get the full list, go up there and you can do that print, and you could print a copy of that report, including, remember that there's an option on that print screen where you put a check mark in where it says print to file, and you can then save that out as like a CSV file that you could open in a spreadsheet, hand around to have people review and be able to work with it. So summary reports, how you figure out what kind of mess you've got on your hands.
Nice.
Yep. And looking at this list where there are all sorts of document types where there's only one document that's using that document type, this is the exact situation where doing this list will be helpful because, I don't know, some of these that just have like 1 or 2, like draft, I don't know that I would consider draft to be a good document type myself. Maybe a category, but not a document type.
I did this sort of thing for a client at one time and came up, there was one doc type, I forget what it was, but he had seven documents were assigned to that document type out of a total of 800,000 on his system. And I looked at him and I said, this is absurd. And what could he do? He had to agree.
Yep. Okay, Van, I think you were going to tell us a little about tile view.
Well, yes, in combination with some of the filtering that we've looked at, filtering to show, filtering to exclude, one of the views available in Worldox is this tile view, which will group your work list according to your sort order. You can sort before or after, but I have a number of lawyers I've worked with who like to see and like to review the tile view so they can see their documents grouped by document type. So they know that they're going to be looking at a particular analysis document that has a unique doc type, so they can set up filter bookmarks on their toolbar, bookmarks toolbar at the top, and do the search for the client matter, whatever parameters they're searching for, and then sort by doc type and switch into tile view, easily with a single button at the top. A number of folks, when you click into this tile, if you have more than 7 items in the grouping, then a scroll bar will appear and you can scroll through the contents of that tile. You can use this along with your viewer window, your inline viewer, your pop-out viewer, and also your filter tab at the bottom of the screen there. So I have a number of folks who love this tile view to review particular document types.
Yeah, I actually use this a lot. I don't have it as my default, but in certain situations when I'm just trying to see the contents of my specific search result or even a specific matter, it's just really handy to be able to click and switch to this view. Okay, next up we have Sandy.
Well, if you do have a lot of doc types and some of them are, let's say, the same, like motions for summary judgment, pleading. Well, you may know where you put your particular motion, but you probably don't know where somebody else would. So if you search a list, which is searching the current list, again, getting back to that search what button, you can change that search what to current list, and you can search for multiple doc types within that list. Then once that appears, what you can do next is go ahead and bookmark that, which is a great shortcut. As we all know, we love bookmarks, but this will bookmark it to search the current list for those 3 doc types. One click, you're done, whatever list you have on your screen. And then if you decide that, oh, wow, this is kind of a cool idea, can we take it a little bit further? You can use the workspaces and create, again, here's where we can decide what we want to name these. I think they started out by calling them views, groupings, but it's a search within just that client matter. And then you group doc types together. You have a few under each one. You're first in the main part of the case. You see every single document. Oh, just want to see agreements. One click, there you go. Want to get back to the full list, you go right back to where the folder is, or in my case, Roger Rabbit versus Bugs Bunny. So you got to make demos interesting, right? But that would be the full list, and then you can just go back and forth.
That's a great one, Sandy.
Yeah, that's terrific.
So I think actually, oh my, wow, we managed to wrap this thing up in an hour.
We did.
So before we sign off, let me put up on the screen contact information for our special guest speakers. And before I hand this off to Hella, is there any additional words of wisdom that any of you would like to add?
Less is more.
All right then. Well, I will turn the podium back to Hella to wrap this up.
Okay. I'm looking at the questions that have been submitted. One of them was, if we just have a couple minutes to just go over this one, if a doc type is inactive, will it still show up in your sections or list views if used prior to an activation? I don't know if anybody can help answer that one.
Well, you can
Sandy,
you
I
can
think-
still search for inactive documents and they'll show up. You just can't save them to.
Right.
And the documents themselves will still show up.
We'll point out, Sandy, on the button bar that a lot of people don't ever notice that it says active, inactive, and all.
Right.
That's true too.
That's where you would have to start with, is make sure that you switch it from active to inactive so that you can see the inactive to even search for it.
Well, and mostly when I am answering a question on that one, my doc type list is gone. My doc type list is gone. 9 times out of 10, they've clicked on the inactive button accidentally.
All right. There are a few other questions, but I think we are running a little over. So we will respond to everybody who submitted questions and get back to you after we're done, after we're done with the webinar. So I think this was a great session, and thank you to everybody who participated on the panel today and provided us with all the great information about best practices for setting up the document type. We are going to post a recording of this webinar, so anyone who was not able to see it, they can still go and check it out later on. And everybody who did attend or signed up, they will get the link automatically. And then we hope you will all join us again for another session in the future. And we wish you all a good weekend, and thanks for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.